Shouldn't the Supreme Court want to just shut that down to make sure people understand you can't just get into office and start prosecuting your political opponent? Maybe that's why presidents should have immunity.
There was chants all over in 2016 about lock her up. And now it's not about what the chants were. It's what did Donald Trump do once he was elected, which was nothing. He said, you know what, that's bad for the country.
But these people should be indicted. This was the greatest political crime in the history of our country. And that includes Obama and it includes Biden.
As the corrupt Supreme Court continues to deliberately delay ruling on whether or not Donald Trump is entitled to absolute legal immunity, the Fox Propaganda Network and some Republicans still try to make the case that ex-presidents should get that sort of thing, while also pretending that Donald Trump never tried to prosecute his political opponents. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video, but the situation is pretty bleak. The United States Supreme Court deliberated many weeks ago over the question, should ex-presidents be entitled to absolute legal immunity, specifically with regard to Donald Trump, since he's being prosecuted in 4 jurisdictions, 2 state, 2 federal jurisdictions by special counsel Jack Smith. If the Supreme Court, which is controlled by a 6-3 conservative supermajority, rules that Donald Trump is indeed absolutely legally immune for any crimes he commits while in office or even generously acts on his behavior, that's pretty much game over for the 2 federal cases against Trump. Now, while we're waiting on all this, okay, the Fox Propaganda Network and some, but not all, Republicans are really trying to make the case that this kind of makes sense. So we're going to play some of the clips and unpack it together.
Do you think that the Supreme Court is taking all of this into account as it decides whether or not President Trump has presidential immunity? Because I wonder, if you're seeing this kind of a circus now, shouldn't the Supreme Court want to just shut that down to make sure people understand you can't just get into office and start prosecuting your political opponent? Maybe that's why presidents should have immunity. Do you think the Supreme Court is watching all of this and taking it in?
Yes and no, Maria. I mean, I certainly hope so when it comes to presidents, but what about members of Congress or senators or county commissioners? And if you start having these highly politicized DAs and judges, I mean, you issue a subpoena on someone and the media jumps all over it, that candidate's kind of dead in the water, right? Even if they beat it, the legal fees, the time, and so it's those down ballot issues that the Supreme Court case wouldn't necessarily cover, but the left has unleashed Pandora's box here that could destroy our democracy.
Right. So again, you have this Republican Michael Waltz trying to make the case, and he's a Republican member of Congress, trying to make the case that actually it's the left that's the real threat to democracy because they're willing to prosecute criminals, and sometimes those criminals happen to be members of Congress. Now, I'll point out that right now, President Biden's Department of Justice is prosecuting 2 Democratic lawmakers, a Democrat from Texas in the House of Representatives, and then Bob Menendez, a Democratic senator from New Jersey, one of the most powerful Democrats in the Senate because he used to be the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Here's a thought. Lawmakers, unless they are given criminal prosecution, if they commit crimes, they should be prosecuted for those crimes, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum, if the Department of Justice can make the case beyond all reasonable doubt. What this guy self-servingly is advocating for is blanket prosecution for himself and others. Maybe you just shouldn't commit crimes. But again, Maria Bartiromo on the Fox Propaganda Network is teeing it up like, you know, hey, maybe to avoid like these punitive prosecutions, maybe presidents should have like this absolute legal immunity because you don't want to like start a witch hunt against them, right? It's a common talking point that we hear from the right. As a matter of fact, during this conversation with former Trump White House press secretary Kayleigh McEnany, you have another guy on the Fox News network also making the case that, listen, Donald Trump never went after his political opponents. Again, this is something that only the left does. He talked about it, but didn't actually do it.
He hates the concept.
You know what? There was chants all over in 2016 about lock her up. And now it's not about what the chants were. It's what did Donald Trump do once he was elected, which was nothing. He said, you know what? That's bad for the country. I want to look forward and make this country great for the American people. And I think he was right to pivot to issues that matter to every single American.
But again, this guy, we're going to fact check him here in just a second. But what's so funny is, again, how they try to make excuses. Donald Trump only talked about jailing his political opponents in 2016, in 2024. But the fact of the matter is, not only is that wrong to do, period, and super gross. I mean, my God, they complained that Letitia James campaigned, the Attorney General of New York, campaigned on jailing Donald Trump. So again, it's wrong apparently for Democrats to talk about jailing their political opposition, but it's perfectly okay for Donald Trump and Republicans to do the same. It's not. It's really gross when anybody does it. But I'll remind people that when Donald Trump was the president of the United States in 2020, he publicly called on his Department of Justice, led by then Attorney General Bill Barr, to prosecute Joe Biden, a political rival, and Barack Obama, an ex-president, right? And he did this many times. But in this clip I'm about to show you here, it was a month before the 2020 election, the sitting president, Donald Trump, calling for the prosecution of his political opponents.
Unless Bill Barr indicts these people for crimes, the greatest political crime in the history of our country, then we're going to get little satisfaction unless I win, and we'll just have to go, because I won't forget it. But these people should be indicted. This was the greatest political crime in the history of our country, and that includes Obama, and it includes Biden.
These people should be indicted. Bill Barr should indict these people, and that includes Obama, and that includes Biden. Again, funny stuff, given that Donald Trump is now claiming that presidents should be entitled to absolute legal immunity. Well, he clearly didn't believe that in 2020. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called for the prosecution of Barack Obama, an ex-president. And then to people say, oh, you can't prosecute your political opponents. Well, then he wouldn't have called for the prosecution of Joe Biden, the Democratic challenger to him at the time that he called for Joe Biden's prosecution, a month before the election. Folks, the reason I say all this is it's important to fight back against the false premises of MAGA. Oh, we oppose jailing our political opponents. No, you don't. Donald Trump publicly campaigned on jailing his political rivals in 2020, 2016, 2024, 2020 when he was a sitting president. You all didn't say a thing. You celebrated it. You cheered it on. We have reports that when he was president, President Trump tried to get his Department of Justice to go after Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and there wasn't any takers. They were just like, no, Mr. President, we don't have the basis by which to prosecute these people. So the fact that he quietly put pressure on his Department of Justice, which failed after publicly calling for his political opponents to be jailed and then circling back to publicly calling for them to be jailed again, you don't get credit for that simply because your Department of Justice refused to cooperate. We have no evidence, none, that President Biden, Joe Biden, has called for the prosecution of Donald Trump. We have no evidence of that. We have no evidence that he publicly or privately pressured Attorney General Merrick Garland or anyone else to take any sort of steps against Trump. We have Trump dead to rights, doing the very thing that the right, that the Fox propaganda network, that MAGA Republicans lie and claim that Biden has done. We have Trump actually doing that. I will say it is important to note that at least some Republican lawmakers are not so far gone that they won't object to the stupid notion of absolute criminal immunity for a president. So Manu Raju of CNN actually interviewed, I think it was Tom Tillis, and I'm blanking on the other one, was Tom Tillis and there's another one, Tom Tillis and Bill Cassidy. Bill Cassidy, from Louisiana. And they both actually spoke up against this notion.
Then there's a separate question about whether Donald Trump deserves absolute immunity from criminal charges. That is an argument that they are making before the Supreme Court to essentially block two federal criminal cases that he is now facing. And that's the question that I put to a number of senators last week. Some of them don't agree with Donald Trump's argument.
I don't believe anybody deserves absolute immunity. The fact of the matter is, the last thing I want to do, that sounds a whole lot like the position we got rid of when we fought the Revolutionary War. Kings have absolute immunity. I don't believe presidents should.
If a president ordered the assassination of Manu Raju, I don't think they should be held immune.
That's good. That's good that there are at least some Republican lawmakers out there who are willing to recognize the utter stupidity and anti-constitutionalist, anti-American nature of these claims. I mean, we're talking about this, and as we talked about in previous videos recently, MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump and others spread the conspiracy theory, the debunked, dishonest lie, conspiracy theory, that President Biden tried to assassinate Donald Trump when the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago in 2022, right? I mean, we debunked it, wasn't true. It was Donald Trump, number one, wasn't even there at the time of the raid. Number two, the reason he wasn't there at the time of the raid is because the Secret Service coordinated with the FBI, the two coordinated together to pick a day to collect the documents where Trump wouldn't be there. But all of that notwithstanding, I thought Republicans were just arguing for the right of presidents to try to assassinate their political rivals with impunity and not suffer any sort of legal consequence for it because they're entitled to absolute legal immunity. I mean, Tom Tillis and Bill Cassidy might object to that, and thank God they do, but this seems to be a mainstream Republican opinion now, given that it's coming from Donald Trump and his attorneys. They're arguing for it in front of the United States Supreme Court. You have the Fox propaganda network regularly regurgitating the notion. And all of these things are just like inextricably linked, notions of presidential immunity, whether you can prosecute political opponents. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how much they try to move the goalpost, Donald Trump is ultimately to blame for all this. Presidents, Republican nor Democrat, none of them, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, none of them should be entitled to absolute legal immunity. As Tom Tillis says, that's sovereign stuff. That's things that we associate with a king, and we don't have a king. We have a mere chief executive, and Donald Trump is not the chief executive. He's just a private citizen now. And whether or not Donald Trump, has targeted opponents for political persecution, he has. He's publicly campaigned on these things, and then when he was the president, he publicly and privately tried to get his DOJ to go after Joe Biden and Barack Obama. So the reason I'm bringing this up is it's simply a fact. It's an incontrovertible, undisputable fact that Donald Trump is an unprincipled, hypocritical loser on the issues of immunity and political prosecution, and none of us should take any of it seriously, no matter how hard the Fox propaganda network tries to launder his past statements and behavior. So just want to point that out, debunk them every chance you get, make fun of them every chance you get. They deserve nothing less, and let me know what you think in the comments.